Alright, so we've reached the conclusion to 2022. We have a few weeks left to go, and I've seen over 100 plus films at this point. Overall, I have quite enjoyed the year in film of 2022. However, there are always some films that I'm not a big fan of that we are talking about today. I'm still working on my best of the year list. There's still a few films that have to come out for the rest of December that I want to make sure I get in before I make any type of top 10 list, but I can definitively say I have a top 10 worst movies of the year list. I know it's kind of a point of contention to make worst movies of the year list nowadays, but honestly, I think you kind of need to highlight the bad films of every year to make sure that you appreciate the good films that we get each and every year. So I'm sure everyone's going to have a different ranking, so make sure you share your ranking down below if you have a definitive list of the worst movies you've seen in 2022. So let's get into my actual list at my number 10 pick. At number 10, I have Senior Year. This film seems like it was perfectly engineered for people around my age range, people who are nostalgic for the early 2000s and grew up in that time frame, and it has an intriguing premise to it. Having this cheerleader wake up decades after a stunt gone wrong and then attempting to become prom queen at her late 30s, but unfortunately, it's pretty awkwardly executed. All around, I think unfortunately a lot of the jokes in the film don't land, which is one of the worst things you can have happen in a comedy. Whether it's the actual jokes themselves or the physical gags, it just became torturous to watch after a point, which is unfortunate because I do think at one point in time Rebel Wilson's act was funny, and I think as the years have gone on, I think that shtick just doesn't work as well for me anymore. It's kind of gotten stale. It just feels like her acting has never evolved, and it also doesn't help the fact that her character in this is painfully obnoxious. Once we get around to the life lessons and learning to move on with her life, I did not care about that stuff in the slightest. The only kind of redeeming factor in this was the recreation of the Britney Spears music video. Other than that, though, I'm probably never going to watch this on Netflix ever again. At number 9, I have Secret Headquarters. This is one of the very few instances where I've watched something on Paramount Plus because I am a big fan of superhero films, and we see a lot of criticisms nowadays, whether it be Martin Scorsese or James Cameron, about the superhero genre. And with films like this, these are the type of superhero films where I do completely understand their criticisms that they're trying to make. Just an overall very bland experience. It's filled to the brim with generic tropes of the genre, and it is very clearly targeted towards a very young audience and nobody else, mixed with some pretty surface level storytelling. I wasn't expecting a whole lot in the action category, even though it is a superhero film on Paramount Plus, but even the action itself in this looks really bad. It wasn't thrilling at all, and they are just wasting these amazing actors. You have Owen Wilson and Michael Pena in this. Owen Wilson's also just barely even in this at all anyways, but they are severely wasted. It's kind of a waste of time watching this, and it's definitely not a recommendation for Paramount Plus, I'll tell you that. At number 8, I have Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This year has been absolutely fantastic for horror, at least in recent memory, probably one of the best years the genre has had in general. Unfortunately, this Netflix Texas Chainsaw Massacre really missed the mark in all of those categories. Sure, I'll give him that some of the kills in the film were solid, but everything else revolving around the group of awful hipster kids rolling into town was really cringe with its execution. More often than not, these films don't have interesting, well-rounded characters, but usually there's at least one character or two that are interesting. This had zero redeeming qualities to its cast. All of them were so irritating, and as the film progressed, I was just hoping that Leatherface, this older version of the character, would just come out and kill these people so we can get the ball rolling and this film gets closer to its finish. And legacy characters are one of those things that are also very prevalent in a lot of media these days, and how they really prop up a lot of these films. We've seen it in Scream and Halloween and more recent times in the genre. This has to be the worst use of a legacy character probably ever. Bringing back Sally Hardesty for this one last showdown with Leatherface, just horribly executed. There was no reason for her to return in this, and she's just wasted. It felt to me like she was kind of just shoehorned into this to kind of copy the formula that Halloween 2018 did, bringing back Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode. It's a rough experience as a Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan. I mean, this is the most recent entry. We'll see where we go after this, but I can see why they dumped this one on Netflix. At number 7, I have Morbius. Sure, I love participating in the Morbin Time memes, and I do love the dance sequence with Matt Smith, But still, watching Morbius, the film is a complete mess. It feels very reminiscent to the early comic book films of the 2000s in the worst possible way, and it just lacks all charm or basic necessities needed for a film to be interesting. It's a really boring comic book film. It's not helped out at all by how poorly paced the film is, which hinders the film from ever doing anything exciting with Michael Morbius as a character. The action also, not only is it just generic, it looks terrible. All of the CGI in this film is so ugly, it's difficult to watch what's happening on screen, not only because it looks horrible, but you have no idea what's going on to go along with this script that is borderline incoherent at times. You could definitely tell they had no idea how to piece this film together after the fact. This journey that we go on with Michael Morbius' character is all over the place. They're trying their hardest to make this connected to the MCU when Kevin Feige and co do not want them at all connected. So it just causes things to be more confusing when you have this cameo at the end with Michael Keaton's Vulture. Why would Morbius team up with him? And also, how the hell did the Vulture get his costume when he teleported from another universe? Just stupid things like that. They didn't think of that because they don't care. And we'll see if we ever get a Morbius 2, but just this film, probably the worst as far as the Sony universe films so far, the Spider-Man universe. At number 6, I have They/Them. As somebody who is a really big fan of the slasher subgenre of horror, it really pains me to put They/Them on this list for various different reasons. Its biggest crime to the genre is the fact that it's a slasher, where most of the slashing is done off-screen, and the slashing that we do get to see on screen looks really bad. But there are many other problems with the film besides just the lack of horror in it. Maybe with a different writer and director on the project, there could have been an interesting idea here, because I do think it is a good premise, setting a slasher at a conversion therapy camp with a cast filled with various members of the LGBTQ community, but the execution of the ideas is the big negative here. The film in general feels like it's having an identity crisis. Most of the runtime is spent having this coming-of-age style story, which in its core is not very interesting, and it's also very out of touch in the style that it's going for, and just completely forgetting the fact that it's supposed to be a horror film, it's a slasher, and never really committing to either of those ideas strongly, so once we get to the third act, it really falls flat on its face with its messaging. I think that there could have been a good movie here at some point in time, but it does kind of fail at pretty much everything it's trying to do. This is kind of a side tangent, but even still months after this film was released, I've been getting bombarded with ads from Peacock still promoting this film. So more power to them that they're still trying to get this film to succeed in some way, but I don't think anyone's going to be watching this anytime soon. The only memorable moment here for me probably is that really cringe moment where all of them sing Perfect by Pink together. That is the only moment in this that has any sort of notoriety to it, because it's just really bad. Otherwise, just steer clear of this. There are other slashers. It's a great year for horror, so watch one of the better horror films. At number 5, I have Deep Water. One of the more memorable things about Deep Water is the fact that Ana de Armas and Ben Affleck dated for a short period because of this movie. There was a lot of media frenzy around it, and there were so many delays for this film to release that by the time it did release, they weren't even together anymore. For this film supposedly being an erotic thriller where the leads actually seem to have enough chemistry in real life to date, none of that is displayed here while watching the film, which is a real shame because we've seen Ana de Armas and Ben Affleck give great performances before in the past, but their characters here, they're just played so ludicrously, Ana de Armas' character especially as the film progresses. It starts to borderline into comedic territory, but the script isn't strong enough to compel you to keep watching the drama and mystery unfold. There's nothing here that grasps me. And one of the film's greatest sins is even if you were somehow engaged with the plot and everything unraveling, the disastrous third act really cements this as an extremely frustrating watch because it feels like they kind of just packed it in and didn't want to write a third act at all. So it made for a very unsatisfying conclusion, and it's a shame because Adrian Lin, I mean, he hasn't directed a whole lot of projects in recent years, but I mean, Jacob's Ladder, Fatal Attraction, Unfaithful, all of those are fantastic films in their own right, several of them being erotic thrillers. You would think this would be a great return, but unfortunately, it was not. At number 4, I have The 355. Honestly, most people probably completely forgot about this film because it did release at the very beginning of 2022, back in January, but unfortunately, the film has stuck with me the entire year. It's honestly kind of baffling to me how you assemble such a talented cast. Jessica Chastain, Lupita Nyong'o, Penelope Cruz, only to give us some of the worst shaky camera action in recent memory. It was nauseating trying to just piece together the choppy directing of this action thriller. The action alone kind of tanks the entire experience, but it isn't helped by the fact that the script itself is very messy, and there's next to no character development, which is something that you certainly need in a film where you're having all these amazing women team up for a mission. There's just nothing here that gets me invested in these characters. I definitely don't recommend it. I think it's been on Peacock for forever now. I mean, it came out back in January. If you had a whole year to not see the film, you may as well not start now. At number 3, I have Disney's Pinocchio. I make sure I have to specify Disney's Pinocchio because for some reason in 2022, there's been an overabundance of Pinocchio content. I mean, 3 films just alone in this year surrounding the character. Sure, I could have very easily put Pauly Shore's Pinocchio here instead, but honestly, I don't think anyone was expecting that to be good. Disney making a very soulless cash grab remake for their Pinocchio, though, I think is the greater sin amongst all of this. Much like with many of the Disney live-action remakes, there's nothing in this interpretation here that really justifies the existence of the remake. It feels extremely soulless, the shot-for-shot recreation of the original, mostly just lacking all charm that we love from the original film. Nothing here is injected that's new or interesting. You've got Pinocchio investigating horse poop in this. You have these really cringy jokes about Chris Pine. Watching Pinocchio haphazardly go through the exact same obstacles and try to have a connection with Geppetto. I don't know what's going on with Tom Hanks this year. Tom Hanks has chosen some very weird roles between his role in Elvis and this. It's weird. I usually love Tom Hanks and I get excited when he's in projects, but I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if he owed a favor to somebody like Robert Zemeckis to be in this and he kind of just winged it. Speaking of Robert Zemeckis, he has really fallen off a cliff in recent years when it comes to his directing style, which is really unfortunate because at one point in time, he used to be one of my favorite directors. But yeah, Disney once again dropped the ball here. At least this one actually is on Disney Plus only. It wasn't released to theaters. I can understand why. At number 2, I have Cheaper by the Dozen. Now, Disney has kind of had a rough year when it comes to films, TV, stuff on Disney Plus, but I think that this new update to Cheaper by the Dozen is the worst thing out of everything they've done. It is probably the laziest, most forgettable, bland modern update probably of the last couple years for any property. The whole time I was watching this, I felt so terribly for Gabrielle Union and Zach Braff because they seem to be trying, really trying, but there's just nothing here script-wise to give them anything. Nothing in this modern Cheaper by the Dozen works, especially the humor. All of the humor in this falls completely flat. And it does try to be topical with its humor, which I think also adds to that level of cringe. I wanted to die when I heard that the dogs' names in this were Joe Biden and Barack Obama. It also just looks and feels incredibly cheap. Again, it's supposed to be a streaming movie on Disney Plus, but this feels like a movie that should have been on the Disney Channel, not Disney Plus. But hey, I don't know what they're doing over on the Disney Channel these days, but this should have been on there. Maybe it would have had a better audience response with the people watching on Disney Channel, but this is another film on Disney Plus that you can probably just skip altogether. Watch the original Cheaper by the Dozens, all of those. I also have some dishonorable mentions. We have to mention those on the way to the worst movies of the year list. Those dishonorable mentions are Dashcam, The Curse of Bridge Hollow, Choose or Die, Blonde, and Uncharted. All of those films at one point in 2022 were in my bottom 10 of the year, but they just missed the cut here. And at number 1, I have Jeepers Creepers Reborn. The moment that the credits rolled in the theater while I was watching this, I knew this was going to be my worst movie of the entire year. The franchise, it doesn't have a great past, let's be honest here. And I didn't think that the franchise could sink even lower until watching Jeepers Creepers Reborn. I almost felt like I was in physical pain trying to watch the film in theaters. It felt like there was next to no effort here to attempt to make a competent film filled with lifeless, dull atmosphere, paper-thin, unlikable characters, further made worse by the lackluster acting performances. Even the attempts to try and make a competent plot are thrown out the window. There are ideas, questions in the film that just go completely unanswered by the film's end, even leaving off on a cliffhanger. They even managed to ruin the iconic part to the Jeepers Creepers franchise, the Creeper. He looks terrible design-wise, but the kills are very lackluster. They are also mainly off-screen, which is another frustrating thing that I hate about horror films, but maybe they didn't have the budget. You could definitely tell they didn't have the budget with the CGI, because some of the CGI in this, the backgrounds when they're outside, I guess they're supposed to technically be outside, are embarrassingly low quality. It's really bad. I could put a CGI backdrop behind me and it would look more convincing than some of the outdoor sequences in Jeepers Creepers Reborn. All around, just a terrible, terrible film. It makes the last Jeepers Creepers look a little bit better in comparison, although I think that too is awful. Just steer clear of Jeepers Creepers at this point. I don't know what they're going to do with the future of the franchise, but I think this should be almost the final nail in the coffin, even though it won't be. And there you have it. That is my list, the top 10 worst films that I saw in 2022. This was a lot of fun making this list. It was also a little bit cathartic because I didn't make a review for each and every one of these films, so a lot of these thoughts I've actually been holding in pretty much all year long. So make sure you share your list down below. What are your worst films that you saw in 2022? I feel like everybody's going to have a pretty different ranking, so that's one of the fun elements to these lists, is seeing how different all of them are. But make sure you share yours down below. I should be getting up the top 10 best films of 2022 hopefully in the next week or two. I still have to catch a couple more films down the road, so we'll see when that comes up. It'll definitely be out by the end of the year though. Anyways, thank you guys for always checking out the videos. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you leave a like on the video and also subscribe to the channel so you're always up to date with reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more. The next time, I'll see you guys later.